Welcome back with a smiling face. Important note before starting, if you are a fan of audio stories, then our Patreon account is the best platform for you. Join us on Patreon for the best audiobooks ever. No end to days. Episode 6. Chapter 27. Come, Heath instructed. Once I reached the first floor, we walked down a long hallway toward the ballroom. This was the same ballroom where I murdered the Dutch woman. The door was closed, and the hallway had a grey aura. No lights were lit. Heath grasped the door handle, which was still shaped like a dagger pointed down to the floor. Once the door opened, the ballroom was dark, lit only by candles on the poles that supported the ceiling. Red candles, flickering against the shine of the parquet floor. There, curled into a ball in the center of the room, was a little girl, a child with hair the color of sun-bleached beach grass. Standing in a semicircle, each smiling at me, was the coven. The little girl was curled in a fetal position on the floor. It took everything inside me not to rush to her and hold her against my chest. Vicken, Gavin, and Song stood in their crescent shape. I gulped when Heath shut the door behind me. I glanced at Vicken's dark eyes. He had done this on purpose. The vampire rage swelled inside of me. The burning irrational thoughts clouded my mind for one moment. So I walked, swaying my hips. I sauntered toward the girl. This pleased the coven. As I got closer to her, I saw that the girl was no more than 5 or 6 years old. She had soiled her pink dinner dress. I pointed to her. "This is my welcoming gift." The coven, including Vicken, raised their heads in confidence. 4 months late, I spat. This caused a shift. Song gulped. I made sure to keep my hands in my pockets. "We were unsure, Lena," Song attempted to say. "You have been so removed." "Leave us," I commanded. The coven didn't move. The little girl kept her hands covering her eyes. "Leave us!" I yelled so that they had no choice but to obey. I was their maker, their queen. They turned obediently. Vicken was the last to leave. I spun around, my teeth gritted. I wished I could have spit fire at him. "Mine," I snarled, and bared my fangs. "And do not let me hear you idling by the door," I commanded. I waited until I heard their footsteps and quiet grumblings. Only Gavin seemed to be pleased by my sudden anger. Once they were really gone to the 3rd floor, I raced to her side. "Look at me," I whispered. The little girl was shaking so uncontrollably, I held her close to me until it subsided. "I want my mommy and daddy," she cried into my chest. I could feel her tears soak through my t-shirt. I would have spilled rivers with her. I raised her face, and when I watched her small blue eyes examine my face, she broke into more tears. "You look funny," she cried. "You look like them." "What's your name?" I asked. "Jenny." "Well, Jenny. I'm going to take you home now." Her eyes lightened and she stopped crying for a moment, only to hiccup silently. "What town do you live in?" I asked. "Offerton." "Great." Offerton was the name of a town near my home. The IT didn't even go one county over. The instant I took this child and sped off in the car, it would be obvious what I had done. It would have shown with absolute certainty that I was no ordinary vampire. One act would reveal that I was no longer their queen and that I retained my humanity. It would mean my instant death, and it didn't matter. I had to do this. I stood up, and Jenny followed, gathering her dress in her hands. Her patent leather shoes clicked on the floor. "Jenny, you're going to have to help me. When I say so, you're going to have to scream at the top of your lungs. As loud as you can. Like you just fell at the playground." "Okay." She nodded. "I'm going to break the window, and we're going to crawl out." She nodded again. I picked up a metal chair from the side of the room. One of the many used during Nuit Rouge. "Ready, Jenny? When I throw this through the window, you scream." My hope was that they would think I was torturing her, back in my old ways. But I could only hope. I picked up the chair and threw it against the double-paned glass. Jenny screamed as loud as possible, and I could sense the coven's interest. They were on the move from the third floor back down to the ballroom. I brushed the glass out of the window by taking the curtain in my hand. She wrapped her legs around my waist, and I climbed out. We ran, together, into the darkness of the night. Why did those men take me from Mommy and Daddy? We were in the woods, walking along the periphery of a main road. Jenny grasped my hand. "Those men are dangerous, and if you ever see them again, you run away." "What did they think you would do?" she asked. I didn't answer. Our steps brought us to the end of the main road. It had been 4 hours since I broke out of the mansion. When we turned with the road, we came upon a street with a dozen police cars out front of a small cottage. 2 middle-aged people in cocktail dress paced in front of the house. The woman, with blonde hair like Jenny's, rocked back and forth on the ground, her knees to her chest, her high heels scattered by the front door. "Jenny, listen to me. You go now. Will you promise me something?" She nodded. "Don't tell anyone about me, okay?" "Where will you go?" she asked. "Back to that house." "I don't think I'll ever go back there," I said. She hugged me, kissed me delicately on the cheek, and ran down the long length of the street. Her dress bounced with her as she came closer to the house. After a few moments, the woman on the lawn screamed, "Jenny!" The police swarmed around Jenny and her mother, and I turned to face the woods. I walked into the thicket, into brush and trees of the dark woods. The police would check the street and I had to get away from there. I walked even deeper into the woods. I would find my way out eventually, I didn't care. Maybe I'll find Solien, I thought when there was a rustle to my right, nearer, toward the road. I turned. There, under the shadow of lush branches, stood Vicken. The woods shadowed his sharp jaw and swollen curves of his mouth. His dark hair and long sideburns were black as tar. I could see his pain in the way he tightly clenched his jaw. "What are you?" he snarled through gritted teeth. "Changed." "What happened?" I retained my mind. "My capacity for emotions and thought," I said, finding no reason to lie. "I feel no pain." "When?" "When you remade me." "You forfeit your vampire life," he said calmly, without emotion. "I know the rules." He took a step closer to me so we were only a few feet apart beneath the canopy of the branches and the leaves. "Lena, my love for you prevents me from hurting you. But I cannot lie to them, nor can I save you from what they will do. You know what will happen. They are bound to kill you. Flashes from Viken's thoughts sifted in and out of my mind: the Scottish coast, the periwinkle gown I wore the night I made him, my profile highlighted by the moon as we lay beneath the stars on thousands of different occasions. Then my own thoughts came through: Justin's face smiling at me at prom. Another night, the night after the club, and the way his arms looked as he lifted me up to take me into my bedroom. A new memory came next, a dangerous image. The parchment in my pocket came to my thoughts, the ritual scribbled in Rhoda's languid handwriting. I shook my head and refocused on Viken's eyes. You, Viken said. His eyes held shock and his jaw suddenly set so firm. You have it, he whispered. The dark branches canopied over us hid the beauty of the night sky, but I could see the betrayal in Viken's eyes. His pain was one that no human man could ever have the capacity to understand. I tried to speak, but I could not find the words to respond. I parted my lips, but nothing would come out. Instead, Justin's face came back to my thoughts, and I knew Viken would see and feel what I was experiencing. Red and blue flashes from the police cars lit up the side of Viken's face. It doesn't matter if you have the ritual. I know where you will go, he said. I would have gone no matter what, I replied. I could see in the brown of his eyes that Viken was bound to the men back at my castle. A place I refused to ever return. I knew where I would go in that moment, where I probably would have gone, anyway, the moment I escaped from that mansion. Then I suggest you prepare yourself, Viken said. I was unsure if the next thoughts that came were Viken's or mine, but Justin's broad chest and the way he glistened in the sunlight came to the forefront of my mind. Familiar words echoed in my head: 20 minutes, or the boy dies. If Viken was planning to kill Justin, there was no way I would put his life on the line. This was my fight, not Justin's. It is done, Viken said, using a phrase I had once wielded the night I turned him into a vampire. What he meant was that it was the beginning of the end of all the choices I had made that led me up to that moment in the woods. Letting go of a little girl I didn't have the evil to kill was just proof that whatever had happened to me during the second transformation was real and permanent. He walked away from me and was part of the darkness before I could respond. Maybe it was always meant to be this way, I thought. A fight to the death. I did not linger. I turned and raced into the darkness of the woods. It was late afternoon in Lover's Bay, Massachusetts. It had been 14 hours since I ran into the woods away from Viken. I followed the road, and when I got to the airport, I took an early morning flight and got back to Wickham by evening. Now that the coven knew I was alive, I had access to money again. I didn't care that they would be able to track the flight. They knew where I was going, anyway. I stood outside the gates of Wickham boarding school. I could see the grounds, the meadows, and the familiar red brick of the buildings. All of it was washed in a pink, spring sunset that lit the grass and everything within me aflame. Every blade of grass glinted yellow, then green. With the blow of the wind, a rippling gold. If I were to ever get to heaven, I thought, it would look just like this. The time had come, so I walked through the Wickham archway. The metal facades and spiked points at the top of the gates reached toward the sky. I had to be calculated in my movements. Each Wickham tree was a friendly hiding spot. Vampires are naturally able to find places to blend into the landscape, and Wickham's campus had plenty of places to offer. A couple hours passed and stars started to twinkle in the blue-gray sky. Students passed me, but I never met their eyes. I was looking for Justin and Justin alone. By 10 p.m., I started to worry. I knew that the coven would follow me. I couldn't hear their thoughts, but I knew that Vicken had told them I had retained my human nature. This was a break in the coven's rules, the rules I had created. I was a vampire that could not be trusted, therefore, I needed to die. I knew that Vicken was unable to kill me because of the love bond between us, but the other members of the coven could, and would, with ease. I passed the student union. It was closed and dark. I stepped across the lighted pathway and onto the meadow between Quartz and the union. A group of kids, seniors, scurried together in a tight group trying to make their 12 o'clock curfew. I waited in the shadows next to the union. I'm never going to find Justin like this, I thought. I stepped across the meadow and was just a few feet away from the illuminated pathway in front of Quartz. I stopped in the meadow so my new appearance was still hidden in the darkness. Curtis Enos stepped out of the archway and lit a cigarette. He pulled out a cell phone and dialed. As he walked back in the direction of Seeker and the student parking lot, I trailed silently behind. "Hey, man," Curtis said to the person on the phone. "You guys still at Lover's Bay Toff? You're gonna miss curfew again." He meant Lover's Bay Tavern, a bar at the far end of Main Street. I knew a lot of the upperclassmen went there to drink if they had fake IDs. The smoke from the cigarette swirled up from Curtis's left hand. I never knew he smoked. I wondered when he had started. "Is my brother still there?" he asked the person on the phone. At the parking lot, Curtis turned right. A collection of students were coming out of their cars and walking toward the Seeker pathway. If I knew any of them, I didn't know how I would explain my new appearance. The last thing I heard Curtis say was, "He's there almost every night now." I walked back into the shadows of the trees. Back in town, the late night was my friend. It made it easy to walk on the periphery. I stayed on the outskirts of the crowds, mostly sliding along against the stone wall. I tried not to seem conspicuous. To anyone who saw me, I would look more ethereal than anything else. I had white skin now, and blue eyes that looked like marbles. I walked past the simple shops that I loved, the dress shop, the candy store, the public library, and finally at the end of the street, I came upon the tavern. I checked the street which, other than a few locals smoking cigarettes, was basically deserted. When they went back into the tavern, a rock song echoed out onto the silent street. Once the door closed, I moved from under the shadow of the trees and crossed the street. I barely grasped the door handle when Justin exploded out onto the sidewalk. I backed away as Justin burst out of the door. I ran across the street and watched him from the dark protection of the stone wall. I stayed hidden underneath the trees. There was a street lamp to my right, far enough away that I was in the darkness. I continued to watch. He was even bigger than the last time I'd see him. His chest was more defined, but he wasn't shaved and his hair wasn't short and trim. Long strands fell askew and the style was kind of shaggy, so it fell into his eyes. Nowhere was the collected, happy boy I'd left that winter. He held his hand over his stomach, bent over, and threw up in a corner just shy of the doorway. Justin sat down in front of the tavern with his legs stretched out in front of him. He spit once on the ground next to him and leaned his head back to rest on the brick wall of the building behind him. He closed his eyes. I stepped out of the shadow again and quickly crossed the street. He sniffed a bit, so his sleek nose scrunched up. I squatted down directly in front of him. Justin opened his eyes, but the green pupils slid to the back of his head. He tried to lift his head, and when he finally succeeded, his eyes looked forward. He locked eyes on me and narrowed his focus. His eyebrows furrowed. He jutted his chin out to really try and get a better look. His eyes went wide, and then he started to laugh hysterically. "That's funny." He pointed at me, laughed, and pointed at me again. We were inches apart. I could have licked his lips if I wanted to. "What's funny?" I cocked my head to the right. The connection between us felt like a gold beam of light connecting us like a hot string. "You're here. But I know you're not." He giggled and leaned his head back against the wall. He was laughing so hard his cheeks were bright red. "All right. Come on," I said, holding him from under his arms. In my vampire state, especially this state, I was considerably strong. Not superhuman, but strong. I got him up. He swayed, but I helped hold his balance. "Roy. Dude. Thanks, man." Justin could hardly walk, but I steadied him. "Dude. I'm gonna puke again." He stumbled to the street and vomited. He leaned a hand on a car, and when he was finished he lowered himself to the ground. I leaned on the hood of the car and crossed my arms across my chest. It was late enough and I couldn't care less now what anyone here thought of my new, vampire appearance. Justin was here with me and that was all that mattered. Justin looked up and squinted. "Dude, Roy, I can't focus my eyes. But right now, you look just like Lena." I lifted him from the ground again, and we trudged quite sloppily toward the Wickham campus. Justin's single dorm room looked the same. Lacrosse sticks were strewn around the room, the nicest still tucked away protectively in the back of his closet. Dozens of sneakers were scattered unmatched in the front of the closet. Team uniforms and helmets were grass-stained and littered every possible available space. Somewhere on the first floor music played and echoed through an open window. I wondered where the dorm RAs were at this hour. I looked up. There was something new. Justin had stuck tiny glow-in-the-dark stars onto the ceiling. I looked down at the bed and watched him for a moment. He wasn't sleeping yet, but he was still. He brought his hand to his head and groaned. I lay down next to him softly, quiet so he wouldn't feel it. But he turned on his side and opened his eyes. I was shocked to see that they held tears. I knew he would be horrified for me to see him like this, so I said nothing. He examined my face, and the tears billowed over onto his cheeks. "I know you're not here," he said. "But I miss you." I reached out to hold his cheeks in my hands but quickly brought them back to my sides. "Lena," he croaked in a drunken whisper. And then in the next second, he slept. Chapter 28. The way the sun filtered through the blinds in Quartz was completely different from Seeker. Quartz was set back in a meadow and not blocked by any tall buildings, so the light was strong and bright. I sat on a bay window seat, my knees close to my chest. I leaned my head back as the light trickled into the room. It felt good. Like endless meadows filled with grass. Like summer days on an apple orchard. Like Rhode's voice in my ear. The light made me feel like I was home. I had no need to fear it anymore. Rhodes said I would have gifts I didn't have before, and wielding light with my hands was one of them. An unlikely weapon but a welcome talent. I kept watching the grounds, but there was no sign of the coven. I only had one day to explain everything to Justin and keep him out of harm's way. There was no doubt in my mind that the coven was already in Lover's Bay. I just didn't know where. They too were guarded in their minds. Just when I thought I would have to wake Justin myself, he stirred. Ugh, he moaned, and grabbed his head. He swung his legs sluggishly to the side of the bed and rested his elbows on his knees. He looked at the floor. "How much did you drink last night?" I said, not moving my eyes from him. "Jesus!" Justin jumped up and threw himself against the wall. A horrific realization passed over his face. His mouth dropped, he laughed for a few seconds, and then his face went completely blank. I hadn't noticed before, but on the night table was a tiny vial filled with a clear liquid. He pulled out the stopper and sent the liquid flying at me, so it splashed with force onto the floor. The vial cracked, and glass exploded on the ground. "Are you mad?" I asked, looking at the cracked glass and then up at Justin. He ripped a cross necklace from around his neck and held it out in front of him. "Get back! Have you lost your mind?" It was like an onslaught of every vampire cliché. He leaned to his left and snapped the shades so the entire bedroom lit up and I was awash in sunlight. It felt like a warm bath after a cold morning. He threw a clove of garlic at me, which whizzed by and smashed on the opposite wall. "Justin, stop!" Justin was pressed against the wall, his palms spread and tight against the wood. He was panting. Justin fumbled with the night table drawer and pulled out another vial of clear liquid. With a shaky hand he pulled the cork out of the top of the bottle with the cross chain dangling through his fingers. He tossed the contents of the bottle again so it splashed in my face. I wiped it slowly with the back of my hand. I stepped back. Justin was balancing on the tips of his toes. "Stay back," he commanded. "Was that holy water? None of that is going to work. Vampires are older than Christ. You said if you were ever a vampire again you would be evil, reprehensible." Justin tiptoed sideways like a crab toward his bedroom door. "It's true. I did say that. But, I'm different." "What do you mean?" "Something happened in the transformation. I retained my humanity, my soul." Justin stopped moving but kept his hands raised, a crucifix extended in his grip. "How?" "I have no idea." Justin's eyes narrowed, and he examined my face. "I swear," I said. "The only thing you can do is trust me." We were quiet. Voices of early risers echoed in the hall. Justin dropped his hands by his sides. "You look different," he muttered. His eyes darted from the floor to me and then back at the floor. "The pores sealed during the transformation. Tear ducts, too. It gives us a glowing, waxy appearance." The way the light streamed into the room, a wash of morning shined over the wooden floor. All of Justin's belongings felt suspended in time, frozen. "We have limited time, and I must tell you why I'm here," I said, and gestured to the bed. Justin, still with his back against the wall, scooted until he reached his bed again and sat down. He leaned his back against the wall. I sat down a couple feet away from him, almost at the end of the bed. I didn't speak just yet. "I've thought about you coming back," he said. "Thought maybe I dreamt the whole thing. But other people remembered you, and I knew all of Wickham hadn't lost their minds. But I thought maybe I'd lost my mind, anyway. You didn't. I wish I had." That stung. "That night at winter prom," I started to say. "I just started to get my life back together," Justin interrupted. "I never meant to ruin your life," I whispered. "The absence of you ruined my life." Hot shame oozed through my chest. "Where did you go?" Justin asked. "Back to England." There was a beat of silence, but I continued. "There is a reason I'm here. The fact that I retained my soul is a bit of a problem in the vampire world." I told Justin about Vicken, the coven, the whole lot. I told him of the young girl back in England and that once my true nature had been discovered by Vicken, I left straight away. The bond between the coven magically binds Vicken to me. He cannot hurt me. "Because you loved each other 100 years ago." "Yes. But you can hurt him." I nodded. "Once I was made human, the bonds of love were broken." "See," I said, daring to rest my hand on the bed close to Justin's foot. Justin didn't jump away, so I left it there and continued. "Once a vampire falls in love, they are bound. For eternity." "Are you bound to, humans?" Justin asked. The apples of his cheeks flushed red. "No. Only vampires are cursed by that particular piece of magic. So we're not bound." "Not in that way, no," I explained. Justin pressed his fingertips to his temples and rubbed them in small circles. "What a day for a hangover," he said, and got up from the bed. He looked out the bay window at the sleepy campus. "I'm here for your protection," I explained. "So they're coming?" "For me?" Justin asked. His tone was factual, not afraid, almost a little glib. "No. They're coming for me." "I don't get it. Why come here?" "The night of winter prom, I'm quite certain I saved your life. Vicken said that if I didn't go with him, you would die. A few days ago, the night my true nature was uncovered, he saw into my thoughts. At least I think he did. The first place I thought to come was here. Vicken knows I would do anything to protect you. If I didn't come here, they'd come, anyway, just to check, and kill you in the process. It's a catch-22. A look of panic swept over Justin's face. He swallowed hard. "Okay," he said, grabbing a lacrosse stick from the back of the closet as he paced. Unconsciously, he was cradling it like there was a ball in the net. "So, we need a plan. How can we kill a vampire?" he said, looking more like the Justin I knew. "You can kill a vampire by sunlight. The other classic ways are beheading, or a stake through the heart." I never understood that. The sunlight. Vampires cannot be in sunlight because they are not whole. As I told you, our pores are sealed to protect the magic inside. When white light hits our skin, little fires ignite. The sunlight burns our sealed pores open, exposing the dark magic to the bright day, snuffing it out, as if it never existed. We are cold as ice, preserved in the darkness. Sunlight breaks these bonds down. It sounds so clinical. We are all born from the earth. It only makes sense that something natural would kill vampires. What about garlic cloves and sleeping in coffins? Authors like to have fun with vampires, I explained. Only the natural elements can kill us. And we can kill one another. We were quiet again. So this is you as a vampire. Justin sat down on the bed next to me, the lacrosse stick still in his hand. Doesn't seem so bad. Justin's eyes did that twinkle that they did when he spoke softly. He reached his right hand out and placed it on my left knee. With his other hand he touched my cheek and turned my face toward him. We looked at each other, and I could feel through ESP as well as my heart that he wanted to kiss me. He leaned forward, and I did, too. Just when his lips parted, I pulled back. We can't, I said, looking at the floor. Because you're a vampire again. That's the long and short of it, I said, and stood up. I turned. There's something else. I was facing him. Something else you need to know. I placed my palms together so the left side of my right hand was touching the right side of my left hand. If I had matched the lifelines from the left to the right hand, they would have been perfectly connected. I tensed my palms so my fingers shook, like they were vibrating. Then, in a low hum, my pores opened and light came through. A white trickle of light then became a strong ray and shone up from my palms and onto the ceiling. I watched goosebumps roll over Justin's arms. He stood up and squinted down at my open hands. Without looking away from the light shining out from my palms he said, "Don't all vampires die in the sunlight?" I placed my hands by my side, breaking the connection and throwing the room back into the light of the early morning. This is a particularly unique gift. Justin swallowed and said nothing. During the day, you're safe, I explained, trying to calm him down. Vicken is the only one strong enough to stand the sunlight. He wouldn't risk exposure in a place he doesn't know well. If for some reason we're separated, around 6 o'clock make sure you are indoors in a locked room. I watched goosebumps roll over Justin's arms again. His eyes darted to the window and the day breaking over the green trees that decorated his view. It's morning now, he said. Everything's changed. And so it was. Chapter 29. It took an hour to convince Justin that he needed to go about his day as though I wasn't there. I'll meet you at your lacrosse practice. In the woods that separate the field from the beach. Just come to the edge. I'll see you. When I finally left that morning, I tried to keep a low profile. I wore one of Justin's black baseball hats, jeans, and a black t-shirt. Every few moments I touched the outside of my jeans, on my pocket, just to make sure that I still had the ritual tucked away safely. It was 6 in the morning, so I knew as well as anyone that the campus was basically deserted. Cherry blossoms dripped off the branches of the trees that lined the pathways. Daisies and tulips grew on every manicured lawn, and the grass was greener than ever. I passed the crowded Wickham greenhouse, it was almost bursting with plants. While Justin showered and got ready for his day, I had something I needed to see. The art tower at Hopper. It wasn't that I hadn't wanted to think of Tony while I was in Hathersage. Quite the contrary. If I thought of him, my focus would have come crashing down, revealing my true intentions to the coven. It was already a struggle not to think about Justin every time I blinked an eye. I climbed the familiar art studio stairs, running my hand over the banister of the twisting and turning wooden staircase. I looked out the small, square windows with a dull pain in my heart. I stepped quietly. I knew there was a banister beneath my hands, but I could not feel the textured wood or the coolness of the air in the tower. Just that there was air in the stairwell and it entered in and out of my body. Finally coming to the top of the stairs, I stepped into the art studio doorway. There, across the room, and in the same spot from that winter, was my portrait. I walked toward it and stopped at the other side of the room. Unlike my sense of smell before, which was limited to blood and flesh and occasionally herbs, this time, every smell was heightened. For instance, I could smell every single ingredient in the paints. I could tell just from taking a breath which colors were which. The pine green paint had more ammonia than the red. The brushes smelled clean, like soap. There were exactly 5,564 cracks in the wood of the wall behind the painting. These days the preciseness of my vision and the strength of my smell was too much to take. It was just another pain I had to endure. I looked over the portrait. It was amazing how accurately Tony had depicted the muscles in my back and the exact curvature of my mouth. And the tattoo on my back, as well. Tony had captured Rhodes' handwriting. My eyelashes, too, and the golden tint of my skin. Thump thump, thump thump. Someone was coming up the stairs to the art tower. Because of a lumbering step, I knew that weight on the right side of the body was heavier than the left and remembered Tony's mismatched boots. He stepped into the doorway. Tony gasped. I kept my back to him though I turned my face so he could confirm for himself that it was me. I turned back to look at the portrait. He, on the other hand, was staring at the back of me. I could feel the intensity of his gaze. Although the normal human cannot see the vampire aura, they can feel it. The air was still. The only sound was a rush of the breeze through the open windows. A whir, then silence. Rode Lewin, I said. Tony didn't move. He was a 14th century vampire. I stared at the features of my portrait. Original member of the Order of the Garter. A ring of knights under Edward III. Tony walked toward me. After a moment, he was standing beside me and we both stared at the portrait. Neither one of us looked at the other. Coined the phrase "evil be he who thinketh evil." He was the man in the engraving and in the photo. He died in September. I looked to my right and met Tony's eyes. They widened as he searched my face. My vampire appearance must have frightened him, the sealed skin, and the radiating aura. Like a gleaming ghost. The blue of my eyes was like sea glass, hard and flat. Tony swallowed hard and kept his eyes on mine. In this state, in a dark room, my pupils were almost entirely closed like a cat's in bright sunlight. I examined Tony's face for the first time in 4 months since I saw him slow dancing with Tracy at the winter prom. He looked the same except he had shorter hair and bigger gauges in his ear. It made his lobes seem even larger than the size of a quarter. I looked back to the portrait, this time noticing the slope of my shoulder. Tony had depicted it exactly right. With the small dimple right at the joint of my shoulder. I could feel the energy coming off Tony, his heat, the sudden drops or changes in his body. I wasn't scaring him at all, he was anxious. Rode once told me that when vampires first came into existence, we really were just corpses filled with blood. Enchanted by whatever black magic curses us. I paused and looked at Tony again. But we evolved, as all things do. We shared a small, comforting smile. There was a beat of silence while I looked over the features of my former self. As I turned to leave, I added, "Who are they to judge the damned?" Once my back was to him, Tony called, "So that's it? You're just gonna leave?" I turned back to Tony, who remained in front of the portrait. "I came to tell you the truth, as I should have months ago." "Were you a vampire then?" "No. When I left that night in December, I was remade." Tony swallowed. I walked to him, but I could tell that once I was inches from him he was finally afraid. He took a step back, but I placed both hands on Tony's shoulders and looked directly at his face. "Look at me," I whispered, allowing my fangs to come down from my mouth. They weren't long, they were small but deadly. Tony looked toward the floor. "Look at me," I repeated. Tony's eyes darted from my boots, to the floor, up at my eyes for a fraction of a second, and then back down at the floor. "You deserved the truth. About me, about Rode, all of it." Tony's eyes, the brown eyes that showed me kindness in moments when I really needed it, looked as though they would spill over with tears. "You look so different," was all he could say. He grimaced, likely to prevent himself from crying. He clenched his teeth and his nostrils flared. "I know." I sighed. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Tony asked. "I didn't know what would happen. You seemed so intent on finding out the truth. It seemed too dangerous." "Will you stay?" "No, I must leave as soon as it's safe." "Where?" "I'll come visit." A dash of panic surged through me. "No. No, Tony. I wish it could be. But you have to promise me you won't go looking for me. Your acquaintance with me will get you killed." "I won't risk that. I want to help you. I want to protect you," he said, and a tear managed to escape down his cheek. I knew to expect this. I gripped Tony's shoulders, not hard, just hard enough that he would stop trying to talk. "Do you not understand? Can I not be more clear? I am here to protect Justin," I said with urgency, "and myself. Why? I belong to a coven of vampires. They saw me with Justin at winter prom. I have betrayed them, and now they are on their way here to find me." "Here?" Tony's voice cracked. "To Wickham." "Yes. Right now." Suddenly, the image of Tony sprawled on the floor, covered in bite marks and drained of all his blood, made my words disappear. I took a moment to formulate my words carefully. "There is no protecting me against them, Tony. You will be killed, and your death, God, I don't even want to think of it." My words seemed to stick in my mouth. The tears, the curse, all of it came up from the pit of my soul. Instead of tears, the fires were coming up into my body. The relief from the tears would never pour down my face. I let go of Tony's shoulders and bent over. I held my stomach from the pain. That was the curse of the vampire. Punishment for wanting anything more than utter despair. Once it passed, I stood back up. Tony wiped the tears from his cheeks with his fingertips. I felt a surge through me, to protect Tony. I loved so many things about him, that his fingers were always stained with paint or charcoal, his casual sense of humor, and that he was loyal, to the end even when I had lied so many times. He pursed his lips, highlighting his high and prominent cheekbones. "This isn't some secret I'm trying to hide from you," I said. "This is a dangerous group of men who will be here by nightfall for one purpose: to murder me. I don't want you in the middle. What are you going to do? How are you going to stop them?" "I have a few tricks up my sleeve," I said, and looked to the window when lines of light moved across the dark wooden floor. I looked up at the window. "I must go," I said. "But it's early." He looked to the window, too. The instant the sun rises, it also begins to set. The moment we are born, we begin to die. All of life is a cycle, Tony. When you realize this, that vampires are outside the realm of natural life, you will understand. I'm sorry, but I really must go. I don't understand. Please stay. I promise you, I will come to you and tell you everything, my birth, my death, and how I ever came to be at Wickham. As long as you promise not to meddle in whatever happens tonight. When will you come back? When you are just old enough to believe that perhaps this was all in your mind." "I'll never forget this," he said. "I'll never forget you." I held Tony's gaze, and just as I turned to leave, he asked, "Did it hurt to be remade?" "This hurts more." The corners of Tony's mouth turned down, and tears ran down his face. I wanted to take his hand, run outside, and suddenly be back in my life. "You're still my best friend, Lena. No matter what happens. I am going to confess something to you," I said. I don't think I've even said these words to myself. But I can tell you. Because you're you. I smiled again, just for the quickest of moments. The silence gave me strength, propelling my words into the air. I wish I had never walked out onto that orchard that night. I took a deep breath just to give myself strength to say the words I wish I had died in the 15th century as I was meant to. But, instead, I'm here, picking up the pieces. Although Tony would never understand what that meant, it didn't matter. It was irrelevant that he didn't know the story of my vampire making. Tony understood me, and that's why I said it. I looked into Tony's eyes as long as I could before I would have to make small talk. I turned from him and walked down the winding wooden steps and back out into the world. Chapter 30. "Rosemary," I told the woman behind the herbs and flowers cart. I was on Main Street at about 1 in the afternoon. After she bundled the rosemary into a tight bunch, she tied it together by a red ribbon. I took it and walked under the shaded branches of Lovers Bay's Main Street. Humans walked by me and no one knew, or at least they didn't behave as though they recognized that I was different. I wore the baseball hat and kept my eyes to the ground. Once I left the farmer's market, I checked the position of the sun again, making sure I had enough time before the coven emerged. I started on my way out of the commercial section of Main Street. I headed toward the Lovers' Bay Cemetery and held the small bundle of rosemary in my left hand. I gripped it tighter, crossed the street, and walked into the cemetery. It was very quiet, even though cars passed behind me on the street. Some headstones were ornately carved and weathered while others were sleek and modern. I maneuvered through the grassy lanes. My thoughts rolled over Justin's face, Tony's promise, and my hope that now, with the ritual in my pocket, I could go back. Maybe. Even though I'd had the tombstone created long before my hasty departure last winter, I hadn't seen Rhodes' tombstone myself. There, I thought. I walked slowly down the end of the row. Facing me, in the direction of the sweeping grounds, was a horizontal granite slab. It lay directly on the ground and did not stick up like the other headstones nearby. To the right of it was a dense wood filled with thin oak trees. Some of the branches jutted out so far that they dangled over the stone as though they were protecting it from rain or perhaps direct sunlight. Road Lewin. Date of death, September 1, 2010. Evil be he who thinketh evil. The birds chirped and the wind was light, throwing strands of my hair around my face. My eyes focused on Rhodes' name. An ominous hush fell over my ears, and I knew a vampire was close. That eerie silence. That inherent knowledge that something ancient and dead was nearby. My gaze slowly circled the cemetery. I made sure to keep my hands in my pockets for fear of my new power. I scanned the perimeter of the woods again. Through thick brush and a collection of dense green, Viken emerged from the trees. Even though I had seen him in modern-day clothing in Hathor's age, I was surprised by his contemporary appearance in Lover's Bay. He fit in, with his dark sunglasses and a long-sleeved shirt. No matter the circumstance, his strong shoulders and powerful build made him gorgeous. I looked back at the tombstone as though Viken's presence meant no difference to me. He approached me in silence and stood on my right. Together, for one moment, we looked down at Rhodes' grave marker. The only sounds were the birds chirping and the rustle of the leaves through the wind. Then he said, "So, you've come to protect the boy." I studied the etching on the tombstone, saying nothing. Viken turned his head to look at me. "That is monstrously stupid." Again, I said nothing. "You know as well as I that despite my every intention, I cannot kill you. Though the coven has come to do just that." I turned to meet his gaze. "Then you find yourself at quite an impasse," I said coolly. Viken gritted his teeth. "You asked me to betray my coven," he said. "My coven? My coven? No, you ingrate," I yelled. "It is my coven, born from the darkest of ideas. The lowest of beliefs. And fear. They will murder you. Can you not see? Do you not see what you are doing to me? What you did to me just a few days ago, with that child? Perhaps Rhodes' voodoo set you free from our binding, but not me. I don't care." Now it was Viken's turn to yell. "They will kill you, and I will be forced to watch." Viken's voice echoed into the silent, sunny cemetery. "You are still evil then, if you wish such torture on me." I said nothing. He was right about all of it. "Once upon a time," he continued, "you told me you would be with me. Always, you said. How quickly you forgot, when Rhodes returned." I sat. I waited for you to awaken. I nodded, but it was quick. I saw my own reflection in the silver of his sunglasses. "Why are you here?" I asked. "You're very brave to risk the sunlight." "I'm not afraid of that anymore," Vicken said. "And the coven? You know they cannot be in the Sunday." The momentary relief that spread throughout me was my realization that if Vicken was here, then he was not with Justin. "If they will kill me," I asked, "why have you come?" "You have two choices. You die by your own hand, or they kill you," Vicken said calmly. I looked back at Rhodes' tombstone, still keeping my new and powerful hands in my pockets. "At least I have a choice," I said, though every syllable was dripping in sarcasm. Now Vicken turned his body toward me. "I'm trying to make a deal with you, Lena." "Vampires don't make deals," I snapped. "Use the ritual. Make me human and die at your own hand. Or the coven will kill you and the boy. Your death is inevitable. You cannot return to the vampire world." I could feel the warmth of the fire within me, the white of the light that now resided inside my soul, and the love I had for Rhodes, Justin, and, some time ago, Vicken. I took a deep breath. I wouldn't let them hurt Justin. Vicken raised his sunglasses, and I looked into his coppery eyes. The truth behind them was familiar to me, and for one moment I understood Vicken completely. We could have been on the fields in Hathersage. I could have been Rhodes. This humanity you desire cannot be wielded by me. Remember what I told you? The ritual calls for the vampire performing the ritual to be 500 years old or more. But you are powerful. Perhaps it will work. "I do not think so," I answered. "Do it, anyway. For someone who claims to love me, you give my life up quite freely. They will kill you, anyway. Rhodes died for this." I screamed. We were silent again. "The ritual involves complete self-sacrifice," I explained. "Do you know what that means? We were lovers once." Vicken looked at me. Somewhere beneath the shade of darkness, my coven was preparing to fight me. "Why do you want this?" I asked. Vicken considered me for a moment. "I became this monster for you. But you're gone. I am forced to love the ghost of you in either form. So I die and you're free of me entirely. I deserve it, Lena. Don't I?" "You do, but the ritual is clear. It's more than my age and blood. The person performing the ritual has to want to die. I cannot give that to you alone. My heart is broken in too many pieces." Vicken actually looked crestfallen. His dark eyes, the familiar look he gave me, he wanted me and hated me all at the same moment. He placed his sunglasses back on. "Say your goodbyes then," he said, and turned on his heel. He disappeared into the trees. I thought about calling out to him, calling into the branches and flowers that I knew smelled so good. If this were different, if this were how I could have wanted it, I would have sat with my friend and told Vicken how the earth in Lover's Bay rose to meet my feet in a way that nowhere else had. But I couldn't. Much to my surprise, he called to me again. "Go forth," he said from somewhere in the forest, in darkness and in light. The lacrosse field was washed in peach sunlight, a kind of late afternoon light that made the whole field glow. But I watched from the shadow of the trees. The leaves protected me, and although I wasn't afraid of the sun, I never risked standing in it directly. I looked at patches of the sky between the geometric angles of the leaves. I could tell from the sun's position that it was close to 4 in the afternoon. I leaned back against the bark of a large oak tree. After talking to Vicken, it was clear the kind of battle this was going to be. Song would attempt to fight me physically, Gavin would attempt to spear me with a knife, Heath would use his words to attempt to distract me. But it was Vicken who would watch it, immobilized by the bond between us. The light was the answer, the only answer. I turned my attention back to the field. Justin sweated beneath his helmet and I could see tiny beads of perspiration resting on the top of his upper lip. He held his arms high in the air so his biceps flexed and pushed out from underneath the short sleeve of the lacrosse jersey. A line of girls, including the original three-piece, sat on the benches to watch the practice. A burning tinge of jealousy shot through me, but I shook my head quickly. That, more than anything else, was irrelevant now. Beyond the field and across a pathway I could see the greenhouse. I wondered if in some magical world I could walk in, hide, and sleep amidst the nasturtium and roses. Then Justin ran past my eye line. He wasn't in his varsity uniform. He wore a jersey and shoulder pads. Justin cradled the ball, dodged through other players, and finally shot it at the opposing goal. When he jumped up and down in victory, the coach blew a whistle indicating the end of practice. Justin took off his helmet and when he did, he looked to the trees. He ran off the field with his lacrosse equipment over his shoulder. He stood on the border of the trees that lined the perimeter of the field. To the right of me was more woods and past that, the beach. He stepped into the woods, and as the light from the sky shined down onto the ground, I remembered the first time I ever saw him. The boat racing, the beach, the way he glistened. He was still glistening, I just wasn't a part of it anymore. Once he stepped a few paces into the thick bush, he saw me leaning against an oak tree. "It's time," I said. "What's the plan?" he asked. "What did you do all day? Is your boat available? I want to go to the harbor near Wickham." "Why?" "I'd like to keep watch on the campus. I think we can stay one step ahead that way. But I'll explain everything later. We have to go. This really is time sensitive." I took a few steps through the woods in the direction of the lacrosse field. Justin stayed near the oak tree and readjusted the equipment on his back. His eyes were hesitant. "I'm hungry," he confessed. "Oh, of course. I forgot," I said, feeling very foolish. "I'll be really quick," he interrupted, and motioned his head to the right. I looked and he was motioning in the direction of the Union. "I'll grab a sandwich to go. Sunset is at 8, which means we must be on your boat by." "I know, it'll be quick, Lena," he said with a smile. How could he possibly smile at me? I was a monster. "Right," I said, and stepped to the edge of the woods. "Let's go." Chapter 31. "This way," Justin directed. I checked the position of the sun again. It was a deep orange and almost near the horizon, near 6:30. The sun would set in an hour, and I wanted to be well out on the harbor before the sun went down. Once the lights went out, the coven would be on the hunt. I got out of the car. Justin locked the door and placed his keys in his pockets. The gravel crunched under the firm soles of my boots. We walked in the direction of the docks. "He wants to be human." Justin asked, referring to Vicken. That's what most vampires want, I explained. To go back. To touch, smell, feel. Have rational thought. Most often too much time passes and everyone they love dies. The desire to become human again wanes. That's when the madness takes over. What happens when a vampire loses their mind? To explain who those vampires are would be very frightening for you. I'd rather we not talk about it. Justin asked nothing more. We hurried down the dock and onto Justin's boat, where he'd packed some drinks for himself in a small cooler. As he turned the key and started up the engines, I climbed down into the comforting underbelly of the boat. We agreed that the harbor facing the school was the most efficient way for me to watch the school yet stay far enough away from the coven. They would never suspect the harbor. I was hoping I'd see them from afar and stay one step ahead. I walked down the cabin hallway toward the bedroom in the back. I sat down on the edge of the bed. Everything was the same as the last time I'd seen it. The only thing that was different was my reflection in the mirror above a small sink. I could feel the rocking of the water under the boat and I looked down near my feet. A small stain had discolored the blue carpet, so it looked a deeper sapphire. It was the suntan lotion stain. The oil had sullied the rich fibers of the carpet. The motors slowed, so the puttering and electric roars became just a purr. "We're here," Justin called. I heard him open the hatch and drop the anchor. I headed up to the deck. We were back in the harbor, where we went on the snorkeling trip. With my vampire sight I looked at the intricacies of Wickham Beach, the tiny glints of sand sparkling in the middle of the beige and the discarded soda bottles spilling over the trash can next to the pathway. I scanned the campus. I just kept waiting and waiting for the moment the coven would emerge from wherever they were hiding. An hour or so passed, and nothing. I knew Vicken was pacing. I knew he was waiting for the right moment when the coven would begin their hunt for Justin and me. If I closed my eyes and attempted to connect with Vicken, the bond between us would allow me to see exactly where he was. Through the binding magic, he would be forced to show himself. But the connection could also be reversed, so I did not risk it. Justin sat on the bow, and I searched the campus as far as I could one more time. I saw the empty entrance gates and security cars patrolling the campus. Most of the meadows and pathways were empty, though a few students walked here and there toward their dorms or the library. I decided a moment to sit with Justin was okay, as long as I sat facing the campus. I started after him and sat down. The water was still, barely moving the boat. I could smell the intricacies of Justin's flesh. "So we're out here," he said. "It's nearly impossible for them to track us on the water," I explained. "We need to surprise them. They'll never expect us to come from the beach. Also, I need to prepare you for what must happen when we go to shore." Justin looked up. The moon cast wavering glows on the water. "What are you gonna do?" he asked. I hesitated, then spoke. "We follow them and then lure them into an enclosed space. I was thinking the gymnasium. If we lead them on a chase, we're more likely to get them where we want them to go. But when we do that, what happens to you?" I looked down at the rolling water for a moment. I don't know what happens to me. I considered for a moment what this meant to Justin. I could feel his gaze on me. "You know," I said, "I thought I would have a chance to come back here. But I see now that is not possible. Come back? How? The ritual, I said. Justin's eyes widened for an instant as the memory of the ritual came back to him. He knows you have it. I nodded. It doesn't matter. I have to kill all of them, I said. Even Viken. But you said you were bound. That binding has been broken on my side. Because Viken is a vampire, he is attached to that binding forever. Lucky him, Justin said. I smiled, just barely, and it faded with the moments of silence that followed. So we'll fight all of them at the same time? Justin asked. We. Justin faced me directly. Yeah, you don't think I'm just gonna stand around while you fight off those psychos? I smiled. As you saw in your bedroom, I'm not exactly without a weapon. I ran my right index finger along the metal guardrail of the boat, sending a glow of light under my finger. The light? Justin asked. One bright blast should do it. Justin reached toward me, and I could feel his body temperature radiating on the right side of my body. His fingers shook, and he hesitated for just a millisecond before he took my right hand from the bar and held it in his. Warm, he whispered, with a hint of surprise. He brought my hands to his eyes and examined them. His gaze was easy and comforting. Then he did what I least expected him to do. He brought my middle and index finger to his lips and kissed my fingertips. Agony coursed through my body. My muscles tensed, and my nerves contracted. Justin released my hand and held both of my cheeks in his hands. I closed my eyes. I could hardly bear him examining all of my vampire changes. You're still you, he whispered as though reading my thoughts. I finally opened my eyes and noticed that a line of tears poured from his eyes and onto his cheeks. Perhaps he wondered if tears would somehow make him less than a man, but he was the best human man I had ever known. His bottom lip quivered, and his nostrils flared a bit. I wanted you to come back, he said, though his voice quivered. I needed it. Then his hands were running through my hair. Even though I couldn't feel it, I was slipping back into the familiar touch that I loved so much. I did, even in this form, love Justin more than I could articulate. He gripped the back of my head and plunged his mouth onto mine. His tongue moved my lips open and we moved in perfect rhythm, that is, until a man's scream echoed from the Wickham campus. Once Justin was behind the wheel, we zipped toward Wickham Beach. Use your mind, my thoughts raced. Where is the victim? My own plan was working against me. I knew it was bait. They were luring me to the victim only so I would be next. Once the boat slid next to the dock, I slung one boot over the edge and started to run. Justin! You must stay with me. I can't lose sight of you. I called. Lena. There was no time to respond. The battle had begun. Justin slung one more rope over a cleat to secure the boat. I looked behind me and was comforted for the moment to see Justin trailing in my wake. He would catch up with me. As a vampire, I had no need to worry about my beating heart or catching my breath. But I was running fast up the path, past the science buildings, past the greenhouse, up the meadow. Justin ran beside me, pace for pace. I ran as fast as I could. Heavy footprints trampled the grass. I threw my palm out, illuminating the grass. With my vampire sight I could see the shape of Song's footprint. I ran toward Hopper building. Because my gut told me to. When I reached the door of Hopper, I tugged at it once and we stepped inside. We let it close behind us with a deadening thud. The foyer was black. Dim light came from the track lighting above us. Justin panted, trying to catch his breath. "How?" he said between breaths. "How do you know it happened here?" "I just do," I whispered curtly. I scanned the long hallway on Hopper's main floor. I knew with no doubt in my mind the coven was down that hallway. Then a feeling came creeping over me. Dread. Oh, no. 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 Not upstairs. But the coven allowed me to see. They allowed, perhaps insisted, that I know they'd murdered someone in the art tower. Someone I loved. I looked up to the topmost landing. I knew I had to go up there because with every ache of my being I knew Tony was at the top of those stairs. 20 minutes, or the boy dies. Could I have been so stupid? Were they actually thinking of Tony? Not Justin? Step by step we climbed. I reached back, Justin took my hand. Then the metallic smell came through my electrifying vampire soul. My fangs started to come down. I shook my head to rid the overpowering smell of fresh blood. "Oh, you stupid, stupid boy," I thought. "Please let it be someone else." "No!" I cried. Tony stumbled across the room. He tripped over his own feet and slammed into the wall of cubbies. He was covered in blood. Head to toe. His blue button-down shirt was a sticky red. It was unbuttoned, showing his torso. His torso that was covered in holes. "Lena!" he cried, his eyes widened in relief at the sight of me. He coughed blood, and then collapsed on an easel, sending it to the floor. He fell to his knees. I slid across the floor. Tony lay on his back like I had seen him do so many times while lying in the sun. Foolish boy held a crucifix in his hand. Why hadn't I thought to warn him of that? I rounded on Justin and pointed. "Stay back. Do not come into this room. Lena. Tony is my friend. I've been around now long enough to know that modern criminology will implicate you if your fingerprints are found. Stay away." I looked down. Tony was barely breathing. His chest came up and then shuddered as he attempted to exhale. He was covered with bite marks. Everywhere. Down his ribs, his arms, and his beautiful fingers. He choked so hard that more congealed globs of blood came out of his mouth and clung to his neck and chest. They had not made him into a vampire. The thought momentarily entered my mind. Being made into a vampire means a transformation rituals they would have taken him with them. It was clear this was simply a murder in my honor. The coven had descended upon Tony and destroyed him. They only stopped because I was coming. I lifted his head up and slipped my body underneath so his head rested in my lap. "Len." No, I placed my fingers over his mouth. Some blood trickled from his neck and onto my pants. "I thought I could help you fight them, but they found me first." "You were very brave," I said. I burrowed my hands under his back and lifted his dying body close to me. I heard sobbing from the doorway and I knew Justin was watching. Tony hiccuped, and more blood slid out of his mouth and down his chin. Trickles of blood oozed out from bite marks in his neck. This was it. "I'm so cold, Lena," he whispered, and nuzzled his head closer to me. He was shaking badly now. I placed my fingers over his eyes, and the warmth from within me projected outward and warmed his head. It was all I could do to comfort him in the last moments of his life. And then, in a last, shuddering breath, his eyes got large, wide, he looked up at me. He opened his mouth to say something and then he was gone. I had spent so many months researching the ritual. To bring myself back. Really what I should have done was think of a way to protect those I loved when the coven, my coven, descended upon them. Why bother bringing myself back? Another selfish act. Another person I loved dead. I leaned over Tony and kissed his head. "Gracias a vos, amicus," I said, and rubbed his forehead with my thumb. In Latin I'd said, "Thank you, friend." I laid my head for one small moment onto Tony's chest. There would be no heartbeat, I knew that. Yet I rested my cheek against the fullness of his muscles, which would soon harden, stiffen, and he wouldn't feel like Tony anymore. "Is he dead?" Justin whispered in shock. He stood in the doorway. There, in the silence, in the drafty art tower, with the whirring of machines in the belly of the building, with the noises of Wickham and student life, a vampire named Vicken Clough laughed maniacally. It echoed up the hallway of Hopper and wound up the stairs so I could hear it loudly and most definitely clearly. Tony's death would be a ripple of relief in the agony of Vicken's pain. The vampire inside me roared to life. I shot up, erect, my back tight. I laid Tony's body on the floor and my head snapped up. And when the rage within me poured out, my fangs came down so fast that Justin's eyes rounded and his hands pressed onto the wall. "Let's go," I said, my sight clearer than ever. I noticed the tiny flecks of chalk on the floor near the chalkboard. Stray hairs on the ground. Justin's pores and the shape of his skin across his bones. I was deadly. "Lena, we can't just leave him here." "We have to," I replied. I was already out the doorway and descending the winding staircase. I stepped off the stairs and started down the massive hallway, away from the art tower. The coven was close, I could feel it. "What's gonna happen, Lena?" Justin asked. I stopped walking in the middle of the stairs. "Shhh," I said to Justin gently and then took a breath so I could project my voice. "Killing a teenage boy," I called into the darkness of the hallway. He was alone and unprepared. My, how we have lost our edge." I taunted them on purpose. I could sense it, see their movements. They were on their way to me. I still couldn't accurately sense if they were in Hopper Building. The thoughts were abstract. I knew they wanted to find me, track me. And they would. "Let's go," I said to Justin, gripping his hand, needing his warmth more than ever before. "But what about an enclosed space?" Justin asked, reminding me of my plan. But I didn't need reminding. The gymnasium was at the end of the hall and to my advantage, the gymnasium was the perfect place. I looked back behind us at the long hallway. It was empty, but they were close or I was close to them. I opened the gym doors, looked inside, and pushed Justin in first. "Go to the middle." I pointed at the center of the gymnasium floor. The gym was dark except for a line of track lighting along the top of the ceiling. It cast the gym in a dull glow. The gymnasium was a large square room, with bleachers on opposite sides of a basketball court. A line of windows faced the Wickham beach. On the left and right side of the walls, behind the bleachers, were walls of mirrors. Whenever there wasn't a game, the dance team used the mirrors for their practices. It was exactly what I needed. "Place your back against mine," I commanded. We stood back to back, my hands on his waist, his on mine. Our eyes searched, waiting for the chase to ensue. "Promise me, no matter what I do you'll listen to what I say," I said, still scanning the gym. "I promise," Justin said, though I couldn't help but notice the quiver in his voice. "Lena," Justin said, and we turned to face each other. "I have to say this. I love you more than anything in this world. If I don't make it tonight, if one of us dies." Justin grabbed me into an embrace. Our mouths met, and his lips pressed against mine. Justin's tongue eased into my mouth and our kiss was rhythmic and perfect. It tasted like tears and sweat and blood, and all of it was a momentary relief from the grief. I would see Tony's face in my eyes for the rest of my days on Earth. Yet in that moment, there was just Justin and me, and how he had saved me. How he had showed me how to live. Then there was a hushing sound, followed by silence, and I knew. "Justin," I whispered. Our lips still grazed each other's. "Yet," he answered, his eyes still closed. It was silent. "They're here." Justin whipped around, and we were back to back again. Vicken, Gavin, Heath, and Song stood in the shape of a crescent moon. They had come in from the windows. How or why, I would never know. They were dressed in black, some leather, some button-down shirts. Yet there they were, my mighty coven. Gavin, with his black hair and green eyes, Song, with his stout body and massive muscular build, Heath, blonde and beautiful, standing with his arms crossed. He hissed something at me in Latin. Vicken stood all the way to the left, by the gym rafters. "Fool," Gavin said, and threw a knife past my head. The blade had just been sharpened and I watched its pointed end come flying past my eyes. It was done so quickly that it stuck in the door behind Justin and wobbled in the wood. "You knew this would happen," Vicken said, leaning a hand on the rafters. "Bound to your fate, we had to come for you. You knew this. The magic of this coven is sacred." Song took a step forward, but this was it. The time had come. As I had taught them to do, they took very slow steps forward, and soon before we knew it, we would be backed against a corner. I needed the mirrors on the right and left side of the wall. I couldn't let them back me into a corner. I needed to stay in the center of the room. "Malice sit il qui maligni putet," said Heath. What he said was the tattoo on my back. Gavin cackled, and Song crouched in a spider position. This was it, the moment before the attack. Justin was panicking, I felt his fear. "Give it up, Highness," Gavin whispered. "Give up all this," I said sarcastically, though I was stoic in my resolve. I had to concentrate, bring the power from within. Bring on the light. We were surrounded, and the moments were escaping. "Hook your arm around my waist," I whispered, though I knew the coven heard every word. "Oh," Is she planning something? Gavin teased. Quid consilium capis, Domina? Heath hissed. Vicken took a step forward, and I stepped back, with Justin behind me. I held my palms up in front of me and sunlight emitted, beaming out from every pore. The rays reflected onto the coven's faces, each one retracted, shielding their eyes and holding their arms close to their bodies. Vicken's eyes rounded. What dark magic is this? He spat. He shook one of his hands, seemingly burned. Sunlight, I said. My eyes darted back and forth from Vicken to Gavin to Heath and Song and back again. How? Vicken hissed. Song propelled himself forward, jumping high into the air at Justin and me. His hands were like claws, and his fangs were bared. I raised my hands again and pressed the light out. The beam was so strong that Song was thrown back against the line of windows. But, unexpectedly, the beam dulled. Heath and Gavin took another step forward. I pressed the heat through my hands. The sun beamed from my hands once more, causing them to back up, but again, it waned, like the wick of a candle at its end flickering, then burning out. You can only keep that up so long, Lena, said Vicken. Song cocked his head to the side. He was going to pounce again. Gavin reached his right hand ever so slightly into his pocket. A knife wouldn't kill me, but his precision would murder Justin in an instant. I needed the sunlight to come in a blast. I closed my eyes and concentrated, just as I had done all those nights in Hathersage. I took deep breaths, the white-hot heat building inside me. Images came to my mind in a flurry. The first day at Wickham, the deer grazing out in the fields. Tony's smile when he scooped his ice cream. Then Vicken's words came to me and I felt the heat start to make my palms shake. Use the ritual. Make me human. Then the images came back, and my palms began to emit light. I could feel the burn on the sides of my thighs. I looked into Vicken's eyes. The surprise and anger on his face was a mix of emotion I knew all too well. I deserve it, Lena. Don't I? I closed my eyes to Vicken, concentrating on the moment, what I needed to do in order to gain the strength. Rhode's face illuminated the darkness in my mind. Rode on the hill in the dreamlike meadow, his top hat. His death. I felt Justin's hands on my hips and my love for him surged through my body. I was almost there, the power vibrated through me. Lena, Justin said, warning me. The coven was so close. I opened my eyes, focusing on Gavin's hand. He pulled back his hand, knife at the ready. I looked up and locked my gaze with Vicken again and said, I suggest you duck. I raised my arms from my sides and brought them above my head with such a deafening clap that when my palms hit, an explosive blast of white light reverberated throughout the room. Ripple effects caused the gym floor to crack in thousands of places, the windows imploded, and a dust cloud mushroomed. And then, for one moment, there was silence. Chapter 32. Lena. Justin's voice cracked. I'm here, I said. The room was filled with smoke. I was lying stomach down on the floor. When I raised my head, I could see that the smoke was actually dust. Thousands of particles of dust that filled the room, so I could hardly see in front of me. The windows at the back of the room had been blown out, and the dust was moving around in circles from the air rushing in. A man in the corner groaned. I looked left. I saw a pair of black boots, ankle on top of ankle, coming out from behind the bleachers. Vic and Clough had survived. I waved a hand in front of my face, brushing dust particles away so I could see. An alarm started to echo, and once I cocked my head to the side to listen, I realized that it was coming from Hopper. Then I noticed what was in the middle of the room. "Help Vicken," I said to Justin. "Vicken? What? I thought you were going to kill." "Please, just do it," I begged. Justin ran to the bleachers. The alarm blared on. Soon students would wake and the authorities would come. I took long strides to the middle of the room and looked down. There were 3 distinct piles of dust in the places where Heath, Gavin, and Song had been standing. Except, they weren't glittering like Rhodes dust did. They were just dust, like fireplace ash. And then I heard a voice. "Hathersage, England. October 31st, 1899. Lena." Song called to me from the front entrance. The sun just tipped below the horizon. From the long hallway I could see my coven congregating on the front step. Song was dressed in all black, and Vicken looked dapper in his black dress pants, heather grey vest, and black top hat. It was fashion at the end of the 19th century. And we had the money to prove it. A photographer stood in front of the open door. He readied a camera, which was shaped like a box on 3 long legs. The man with a camera waited for us to get into position for the photograph. He held the camera in the palm of both hands, and looked through a tube at the top, a viewfinder. I sauntered out of the front hallway into the doorway entrance. Next to me Song, Heath, Gavin, and, of course, Vicken, waited. Vicken held a goblet. The red contents inside swished in the glass as he handed it to me. "A fine English red," he said with a smile. My eyes darted to the cameraman. "Ready now?" he asked me. "While we still have the light." I raised my goblet in the air. "Lena." Justin's voice broke my memory and my eyes focused on the piles of dust. "We have to go." I turned to see that Justin was holding up Vicken. The blast had knocked Vicken silly, and his knees kept giving out. I had never seen this happen to a vampire before. The alarm shrieked on. Somewhere in the not-so-far distance there were police sirens. We started for the broken windows. I took a swig from the goblet, swirling it in my mouth. Gavin, Heath, Vicken, and Song stood in a circle around me. "This photograph will commemorate our bond. It will represent all of the lonely-hearted, pathetic souls who will lie at our feet." I moved so that I stood between Vicken and Song. Heath and Gavin took position on the other side of me. We draped over one another like snakes in the heat, dangling over branches. I wrapped my arm around Song's back as the photographer readied the camera. I held the goblet in my left hand, lifted it into the air, and then took one more sip before placing it down so I could take the picture. With a film of blood running down my front teeth, I repositioned myself between Vicken and Song. "Evil be he who thinketh evil," I said, lifting my chin to the air. "Let them remember this. Go! Go!" Justin called once we were out of the gym. As I climbed out, I glanced one more time at the ashy piles of dust in the middle of the floor. The coven, my brothers, were gone. I held Vicken under his shoulder, with Justin holding him up on the other side. We ran into the woods that separated the beach from the campus. Vicken tried to lift his feet, but every time he took a step his legs would wobble. He kept looking at the ground as though he didn't have the strength to lift his head. "Not the boat," Justin said. "Why not?" "We have to get out of here," I said, while trying to hold Vicken up. "No, we have to stay on campus. If we go on the boat, the cops will hear the motors. Just leave it. People park at the dock all the time." I could see the beach, but Justin was right. "Seeker," I said, and we moved toward the pathway. Through the trees, back on campus, there were people swarming out of their dorms. I knew we would have to carefully sneak back to Seeker. "Lena," Vicken whispered. "There's something wrong." "My chest." "Stop," I said to Justin. "We can't." "Look," Justin said, and pointed. Police cars screamed to a stop in front of the gymnasium. Lights flickered on in the nearby dorms, and campus security were already getting out of their cars. "We have to get back to Seeker as fast as possible." I suddenly felt a tugging, something making my stomach feel as though it were turning in on itself, and I had to let go of Vicken. But we had to keep going and I knew what was wrong. I grabbed at my stomach for an instant. It was the loss. The loss of the coven. The magic was breaking apart. "You okay?" Justin asked as he held Vicken. "Yeah," I said, retaking my position to carry half of Vicken's weight. Then I looked far into the woods, down near where the chapel stood. Solien stood in the darkness in his traditional Indian garb. He raised a palm to me and then brought it to his heart. "Lena, are you still here?" Vicken whispered. I looked down at Vicken for just an instant. When I looked back to Solien, he had gone. I didn't have time to wonder how and why he was there. I wanted to ask him so many questions, but there was no sign of the vampire in white. Justin started walking, and we crossed over a pathway. We headed behind the science buildings back toward Seeker. "Lena," Vicken said. "Yes," I said. "I'm still here." Once we were far enough up the path, I looked back at Hopper. The rhythmic red and blue lights from ambulances and police cars filled the darkness. Someone had to have found Tony by now. I wondered who would call his family. My heart hurt. After we broke into the delivery entrance of Seeker, I helped Justin carry Vicken up to my room. As we lifted him stair by stair, I knew why I had saved him. He was just like me. A victim, bound to love someone who was no longer available. He lived in an eternity and I wasn't going to allow that to happen anymore. Justin grabbed glances at me as he reached out for my left hand. He held it tight. We stood in front of my bedroom door. "Tell me what you're thinking," he whispered. Vicken groaned. Both of our eyes darted to him. We could hear students running down the stairs below us, eager to find out what all the commotion was about. "Lena," Justin said, and squeezed my hand to regain my attention. "I have to know what you're thinking." I looked up at Justin's caring eyes and said, "How would you feel if you'd just killed your family?" We laid Vicken down on my bed. "Lena," he called, but put his arm over his eyes. I closed the door behind me, and Justin and I sat down on the couch. I put my head in my hands. Soon, Justin's strong palm was running up and down my back. I looked up at him, and he smiled gently. I leaned over and rested my head on his chest. It was at least 2 or 3 in the morning. As Justin sipped a glass of water, I stared at the curtain pulled over the sliding porch door. With my head still against his shoulder, I thought of the morning that Rode died and how the curtain billowed in and out. That it had looked as though it were breathing. What should we do? About Vicken? Justin asked. I shook my head. I'm all he has. He wants the ritual so badly, I said. But you already said you needed to be 500 or older for it to work. And it killed Rode. It's really the intent of the ritual that is the most powerful aspect. What do you mean? About the intent? I mean, I said, twisting the onyx ring on my ring finger, that I would want Vicken to live as a human. And I in turn would want to have to die. I looked down at the ring, realizing that I had forgotten I had worn it throughout this entire year. It had been my talisman, the one item, besides Rhodes' ashes, that I'd taken with me from place to place. Do you? Justin asked. Do you want to die? I want the cycle to end. And in some way, it has, I said. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. Just as I had known that night at winter prom when I left Justin in the ballroom. Even if I died, as Rhodes said was a possibility, even if it didn't work, Vicken couldn't stay a vampire and neither could I. And maybe I'd known it all along and it was why I'd come back to Wickham and had worked so long to find the ritual. I need you to do something for me, I said, sitting up and looking at Justin. He was war-torn. His blonde hair was slick with sweat and his face was smeared with dust, the dust of dead vampires. Sure, he said, brushing my hair back with his palm. Will you go see if they have taken Tony's body? I can't do it, but I need to know. Sure, he said, and kissed my forehead. I'll be back in a bit. Once he left and the door closed behind him, I opened the door to the patio, allowing the air to scoot under the curtain and into the apartment. I went into the kitchen and stood in front of the black canisters that rested on the counter. Inside them were herbs and spices. I unrolled the ritual parchment still hiding in my pocket. I picked out time, for regeneration of the soul. As I walked back toward the bedroom, I raised onto my tiptoes and took a white candle from the iron wall sconces. I opened the door to my bedroom. Vicken lay on the bed, his arm over his eyes. I shut the door behind me and pressed my back against the door. After a moment he said, I feel as though I am split in 1,000 pieces. Drawn and quartered. It will pass, I said. Is that all I was to you? He sat up slowly. His eyes were framed with black rings, and his skin had whitened. He needed blood and he needed it soon. He leaned his back against the pillows. Just a victim? Of your dark age. I stepped next to the bed and placed the herbs and candle down on the night table. I tried to stay focused and I refused to look at my bedroom, the shell of my life that I left behind in December. I do not think of you as a victim, I said. Vicken laughed, but then swayed a little, drunk from thirst. Now what do we do? He asked. Shall we return to Hathersage? Go back to our existence? I feel awful. I raised a hand and held my palm an inch or two above the wick of the white candle. Using the light from within me, I set the candle aflame. Vicken looked at the candle and then at me. I slid open the drawer in my night table and found my silver letter opener. Not a knife, but it would have to do the trick. I release you, Vicken Clough. Vicken's eyes widened. No, he said, sitting up rigid. I was clouded. Insane. Lena. I raised the blade in the air and slashed down on my wrist so hard that a gaping wound opened. The blood started to ooze, though, as expected, there was no pain. Vicken stared at my wrist and then licked his lips even though he shook his head. I don't want this. I release you. No, he said, though I extended my wrist toward him. This was what I wanted. To take back all the hundreds of years of pain and suffering. To do something right for once. To set it right. So Vicken could live, and Justin, too. If Vicken stayed a vampire, I would spend eternity fighting him. He deserved more. He deserved it back in the 19th century, when I promised him something I could never give. Justin Enos was the reason I came to life. He gave me that freedom. I danced with thousands of people, I made love, and had friends. I was a full human and I had Justin and Tony to thank for it. And if anything, I owed Vicken that same chance and I owed Justin the freedom to let me go. I stand as your guardian, I said to Vicken. I used the light from my right hand to ignite the herbs. Vicken took my wrist and placed it to his mouth. Believe, and be free. The smoke swirled up from the herbs on the night table. I closed my eyes and did what I had to do. And in that moment, with Justin's face in my mind, I knew it was right. Chapter 33. I stumbled out of my bedroom, closing the door behind me. I fell so my back rested on the wall. I tilted my head back, with my eyes closed. I was weakened beyond my wildest imagination. Most of the blood was gone from my body. I was so exhausted that the room was off kilter and I couldn't focus. To my right was the living room and, beyond that, the doorway to the patio. Dawn had broken and the sunlight was peeking in from underneath the curtain of the porch. Vicken lay in the deepest sleep he would ever experience. When he awoke, he would be Vicken again. Not the soulless angry vampire that I'd created. The front door opened. Justin stepped into the dorm room. His beautiful pouted mouth pointed down, the energy in his eyes was extinguished. He didn't say anything at first. Just the noise that silence makes that can never quite be explained. They took his body, Justin said. The police. He finally looked up at me and his eyes rested on my right hand grasping my bleeding left wrist. He gasped and reached for me, but I put up my left hand and he stopped. Tell me you didn't just do what I think you did. Tell me, Lena, that you would have told me first. I can't. Lena, tears spilled out of Justin's gorgeous green eyes. His young face contorted with pain, and the guilt surged through me. He would know heartache and grief, and I was responsible for it. He walked toward me, but I kept my hand around my wrist, trying to keep the blood in. My body wasn't regenerating blood, it was escaping, and soon I would be empty entirely. Justin reached for me, but I kept my hands close to my body. Stay up, I thought, and concentrated on maintaining consciousness. He kissed me hard. I pulled away and, without a word, I slid off my onyx ring and placed it in Justin's palm. He looked down at it, thrown for a minute, and then back up at me. "Don't you see?" I said, not removing my gaze from his. His green eyes were so watery with tears. "I fell in love with you," I continued. My knees buckled, but Justin was there to catch me. Justin swallowed hard, and another tear fell out from his eyes. He wiped it away. I was seeing double. My time was running low. "Lena," Justin was crying now. I inched to the right, toward the patio door. "Don't do this," he said, as if I could change it. "In there." I pointed at the bedroom door. While I was dying, the vampire within Vicken was evaporating and escaping his body. The intent was you. Your protection and freedom. That's all I want now, is for you to be safe. You'll wake up tomorrow with no fear. It stops with me." Blood seeped through the grasp around my wrist. "Please, go," I whispered. "You don't want to see this." "I'm not going anywhere," Justin said through gritted teeth. "I'm waiting here." If I could have cried, I would have. But there were no tears in me. I was nothing but a carcass. "Just promise me you'll be here when he wakes up." "It takes 2 days. Tell him my whole story. He'll know what to do." "I promise," Justin said, just when the back of my heels hit the patio door frame. I smiled, my hands were shaking. "You brought me to life." Before he could respond, I turned to the door. I thought I heard something before I stepped out into the dawn. I think it was Justin's knees hitting the ground. I pulled the curtain aside, and a blast of morning light hit me square in the face. I raised my hands from my sides. I would tell you that I felt fire, and pain. It would be the only justifiable payback for the way I killed so ruthlessly throughout my life. But I didn't. All I felt were dazzling gold, and diamonds of light. Prologue. There is a bay before me. A small inlet, and spring, it seems, has finally arrived. The branches sway now, happy in their release from their heavy burdens of ice and snow. Did I tell you I licked the snow with my tongue? Yes, perhaps I did. I cannot remember which days I write in this journal and which days I spend talking to you in my head. Today, I write. Lena, I wish you could have seen my face. I bent down, wrapped in a blanket, stuck out my tongue and licked the snow. A grown man. It was wonderful. The wind was biting. Chills ran down my spine and I could taste the salt in the air. I have hundreds of words now for things I had so long forgotten. The locals here ask so many questions. Where am I from? Why is a handsome man of so young an age by himself with no wife or girlfriend? I would tell them I wait for you, but that is only half of the truth. I do wait for you, though I know you will never come. The truth is, I mourn you. Because there is an aching in my soul, I know this, I have one now. I would sprout wings and soar to the highest tower so you might see me, so I could tell you I am whole and sound. But we both know angels make very rare appearances. And I am no angel. I would scream for you if you would hear me. I would burn this place to the ground if it meant you would see the smoke. The only item I burn is sage, and that's to cleanse myself of worry of you, yet you remain. No salt on my window will cure your ghost. Even the waves cascading in this bay lead out to an ocean that flows to the shores of England. I can connect anything to you if I try. This rock in my hand, smoothed by ages in the sea. If I toss it back, could I will it to reach you? England. I don't ever want to see it slaughtered by modern day. Let it remain in my mind as it was before all of this happened. Before you and I in an apple orchard. Before you in a white dress. These words roll in my head day after day, but I find no peace. My dreams haunt me, my worst fear your death, I see it in thousands of incarnations. I must believe that you will transcend this darkness. That you will find a way to prevail and forgive me for leaving you. The rest of the audiobook will be continued in the next episode. Join us on Patreon for early access or more great audiobooks. A link is provided in the video description.